I found my wife sleeping with her boss behind my back, then discovered she secretly transferred $250, $0 from our joint account into her brother's shady business, all right before she filed for divorce to claim our $500, $0 house and my inheritance. I never thought I'd be the guy to find out my wife was cheating on me, let alone catch her in the act. But that's exactly what happened. It all started with small signs, little things I brushed off at first. Sarah, my wife, had been more distant lately, spending more time at work or out with friends. She was always busy, always on her phone, hiding her screen when I walked by. She'd get defensive when I asked about her whereabouts, say I was imagining things or being paranoid. But I knew something was off. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I started noticing odd charges on our joint bank account. Small, unexplained expenses, things that didn't add up. A few nights she'd come home late, smelling like perfume I didn't recognize. She'd lie about where she'd been, claiming she was at a networking event or out with her boss, Mark. I didn't like Mark. He was a slick guy, always trying to flatter her, but I trusted Sarah. I thought she was faithful, even if she was acting weird sometimes. The real turning point came when I decided to check our bank statements more carefully. I knew I shouldn't snoop, but I was desperate for answers. And what I found chilled me to the bone. 2 days ago, I saw a massive transfer 250, from our joint account into some account I'd never seen before. My heart sank. That's $500,000, more than enough to buy a nice house or start a business. And it was gone, transferred right before Sarah filed for divorce. I couldn't believe it. Why would she do that? Who was she transferring the money to? And then I remembered a conversation she had with her brother, Jason, about some shady business deal. Turns out she'd secretly transferred our money into Jason's account, some sketchy operation he's been involved in, apparently. It was like a punch to the gut. I felt numb. How could she do this? How could she betray me like that, not just with her boss, but with our money? All the plans we had, all the years I thought we were building something real, gone in an instant. I started to feel an overwhelming mix of anger, betrayal, and sadness. That night I stayed up, staring at the bank statement, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. My wife, the woman I loved, was planning her escape behind my back, and she'd already lined up her financial move to make sure she got what she wanted: our house, my inheritance, everything. The next day, I decided I had to confront her. I couldn't let her keep lying to my face. I set up a meeting at our place after work. I wanted to hear her explain, to see if she'd admit anything, but I already knew the truth. When she walked in, her makeup was perfect, her smile tight, but her eyes were colder than I'd ever seen. I didn't waste time. I laid everything out: how I found the transfer, the charges, her late nights, the lies. I asked her outright, "Are you cheating on me with Mark? Did you really transfer our money into Jason's shady business? Tell me the truth." She blinked, scoffing a little, then started to lie. "You're crazy. I don't know what you're talking about. I've been faithful. That transfer, it was for a new investment. I told you I was talking to my brother about some property deal. You're just jealous, insecure." She was good at lying, I'll give her that, but I knew better. I saw through her bullshit. She tried to turn it around, saying I was paranoid, that I was accusing her without cause. But I saw the guilt in her eyes, the way she fidgeted, the way she avoided my gaze. I could tell she was lying, and I was furious. That moment I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and rage. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my voice steady. I told her she needed to leave. I couldn't live with her lies, not anymore. I told her I knew she'd been planning her escape, that she was more interested in her own money and her own future than in us. And I told her she'd have to face the consequences. The betrayal cut deep, but I knew I had to be strong. I couldn't let her get away with it. I needed to think, to plan what to do next. I realized in that moment that my entire life had been turned upside down. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was a liar and a thief. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, but I also knew I couldn't let her win, not without a fight. After she left that night, I sat alone in the living room, the silence almost deafening. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd uncovered. I kept thinking about the transfer 250, into Jason's shady business, and how she'd used her own brother to hide her tracks. That's when I realized this was bigger than just an affair. It was a full-blown betrayal on multiple levels. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was trying to wipe us out financially, planning to take everything she could, including our house and my inheritance. I started digging deeper. I needed proof, concrete evidence. I went through her phone, her emails, her bank statements again. I found messages from Jason discussing how they'd split the money, how she'd faked everything with Mark. She'd even lied about her meetings, but the evidence was there: texts, emails, receipts. It was all laid out. She'd been orchestrating her escape for months, and I'd been too blind to see it. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, feeling a mixture of rage and heartbreak. How could she do this? How could someone I loved so much turn into this manipulative, greedy, lying person? I felt betrayed on every level. I thought about the house we'd bought together, the inheritance I was supposed to get, and how she was planning to snatch it all away from me. The next morning, I decided I couldn't just sit and stew. I needed a plan. I called my lawyer, who advised me to prepare for a divorce and to freeze any more transfers she might try to make. I also started looking into her financials, trying to trace every dollar she'd moved and see if I could recover some of what she'd taken. I knew she'd try to cover her tracks, but I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without a fight. Meanwhile, I also started to think about what I wanted moving forward. I realized I'd been giving her too much of myself, too trusting. I'd been blind to her manipulations. But now, I was determined to stand my ground. I wasn't going to let her take everything I worked for. I'd fight for my rights, for my inheritance, for my house. I started to plan how I could legally challenge her, how to get the money back, and how to protect what was left. In the midst of all this chaos, I also felt a strange sense of clarity. I saw her for who she really was: selfish, greedy, willing to lie and cheat her own family to get what she wanted. It hurt like hell, but I knew I had to accept it. I'd loved her once, but now I saw that love for what it was: blind trust in someone who didn't deserve it. I promised myself I'd rebuild, that I'd get through this, no matter how painful it was. I also started to reach out to friends and family, trying to find support. Some told me to fight for what's mine, others told me to walk away and forget her. But I knew I had to do what was right for me. I had to stand up and take control of my life again. She thought she could just walk away with everything, but I was determined to make her pay in a way that mattered, by taking back what she stole and making sure she faced the consequences. This was just the beginning of my fight, and I wasn't going to let her win, no matter how bad it hurt. Over the next few days, I threw myself into action. I met with my lawyer again and started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I knew she'd try to spin it, deny everything, lie her way out of it. That's her style: smooth, manipulative, always twisting the truth. But I had the proof now. Bank records showing the transfer, her messages with Jason discussing their plans, receipts from her trips that didn't match her stories. I also found out she'd been secretly setting up a new account, one she hadn't mentioned before, trying to hide her assets even further. The more I uncovered, the more furious I got. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind, so trusting. I had given her everything: my love, my trust, my future, and she'd been planning her escape all along, with her boss Mark, her brother Jason, and all that money. I started thinking about how she'd lied to my face, how she'd convinced me she was working late or out with friends, when she was really scheming behind my back. It was like waking up from a nightmare, but I knew I had to stay awake and fight for what was mine. One night, I decided I needed to confront her again, but this time with a clear plan. I wanted her to see I wasn't going down without a fight. I called her and told her I had more questions, that I knew about the transfer and her plans. She tried to deny everything, said I was paranoid, that I was overreacting. I told her I'd already spoken to my lawyer, that I was preparing to take legal action, and that I wasn't going to let her steal our house or my inheritance without consequences. Her voice cracked for a moment, then she snapped back with her usual bitchy attitude, accusing me of being insecure and jealous. That's when I decided to hit her where it hurt. I told her I was going to make sure she paid for her lies, legally, financially, and emotionally. I told her I'd expose everything if I had to, that I'd fight for my rights and for the truth. I could hear her panic in her voice, but she still tried to bluff her way out. She said she'd leave, that she'd take the house, that she'd make sure I got nothing. But I was done playing her game. I told her she'd regret it, that she'd regret betraying me, her family, and everyone who trusted her. The next day, I started to prepare for the worst. I contacted a forensic accountant to trace every dollar she'd transferred, every account she'd opened, and every asset she'd hidden. I also contacted a private investigator to see if I could get more concrete evidence of her dealings with Mark, who, by the way, I found out was secretly married but still trying to get with her. I was furious. How could she be so reckless, so greedy? She was willing to destroy everything we had for a quick escape. Meanwhile, I also began reaching out to her brother Jason. I wanted to hear his side, see if he'd crack under pressure. I told him I knew about the money, about their plans, and that I was going to fight to get it back. I made it clear I wasn't afraid to go to the authorities if I needed to. I wanted to send a message. This wasn't just about a divorce, this was about justice. She'd betrayed me, her family, and everyone who trusted her. I refused to let her get away with it. Throughout all this, I felt of emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, but also determination. I knew I had to stay strong, stay focused. I couldn't let her manipulate her way out of this. I had to be smarter, more calculated. I started making arrangements to protect my assets, to ensure I'd get my inheritance, and to prepare for the inevitable legal battle. I was done being the naive husband who trusted blindly. Now, I was in full fight mode, and I wasn't going to back down. Not until I got justice. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. I was poring over every detail, every transaction, every message. My lawyer had advised me to file for an emergency injunction to freeze any further transfers and to start the process of reclaiming what was stolen. I didn't want her to get away with this, not just because of the money, but because of the betrayal. It cut so deep I could barely breathe sometimes. Every time I thought about her lying to my face, sneaking around with Mark, planning her escape, I felt this intense need to punish her, financially and emotionally. I paid the private investigator to dig into Mark's background, and what I found made my blood boil. Mark was a smooth-talking guy, but it turned out he had a history of shady dealings, multiple lawsuits, and a reputation as a player. No wonder Sarah was so drawn to him. She loved the power, the excitement, the idea of sneaking around behind my back with someone who seemed just as manipulative as she was. I could see now that her whole persona was built on lies and appearances. That afternoon, I called her again. I told her I had all the evidence, that I was going to fight her for everything she tried to steal. Her tone was defiant, dismissive. She kept saying I was overreacting, that I didn't understand her, that she was just trying to build a better life. Yeah, right. A better life for herself at my expense. She insisted she'd leave everything behind. If I kept pushing, but I knew she was bluffing. She'd come too far, gotten too greedy. She wanted the house, my inheritance, everything I worked for, and she wasn't going to give it up without a fight. I also reached out to her brother Jason again. I told him I knew about the money, about their plans, and that I was prepared to go to the authorities if I needed to. I told him I'd expose everything if he didn't cooperate. I wanted him to understand that I wasn't messing around anymore. This wasn't just about our marriage, it was about justice. I made it clear I'd fight to recover every dollar she transferred and hold her accountable for her lies. That night, I stayed up late, drafting a detailed timeline of everything: her lies, her moves, her manipulations. I wanted to be ready for whatever she threw at me next. I knew she'd try to spin this as some kind of misunderstanding or bad decision, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I saw her for what she really was: a selfish, greedy woman who was willing to destroy everything we'd built for her own gain. I also started researching divorce laws and asset protection, making sure I'd be in the best position to fight for what's rightfully mine. In the quiet moments, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I realized I had been blind, trusting her blindly. I'd loved her, but she'd proven she was capable of lying, cheating, and stealing from me. I understood now that love isn't enough when someone is willing to betray everything you stand for. I needed to protect myself, my future, and my dignity. I'd never thought I'd be in this position, but I wasn't going down without a fight. She might have thought she could just walk away with everything, but I was determined to make her pay, legally, financially, emotionally. I was done being the naive husband. It was time to take control. The legal process moved quickly once I had all the evidence lined up. My lawyer filed for an emergency injunction to freeze any further transfers from our joint accounts. I also started the divorce proceedings, knowing I had the upper hand now that I could prove her deception and financial betrayal. Every day, I felt the weight of it all: anger, frustration, heartbreak, but also a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of a situation I once felt completely helpless in. Meanwhile, I kept pushing on with my investigations. I wanted to see if she'd try to move any assets again, so I hired a forensic accountant to scrutinize her financial history. Turns out, she'd been opening secret accounts, funneling money into offshore accounts, trying to hide her tracks even more. It was clear she was planning to disappear with everything she could get her hands on. Her arrogance was staggering, believing she could outsmart everyone, even her own brother. I also confronted Jason directly. I told him I knew about the transfer, about his involvement, and that I was prepared to involve authorities if necessary. I told him I'd fight to get every penny back, and I warned him that if he continued down this shady path, he'd end up worse off. Surprisingly, he hesitated. I could hear the guilt in his voice when he admitted that he knew Sarah was planning to leave, that she'd promised him a cut if he helped her hide the money. That's when I realized how deep this all went: family, betrayal, greed. It was like a web, and I was determined to unravel it. As the legal battle intensified, Sarah started to crack. She became more aggressive, threatening to ruin me, to take everything I had, even my inheritance. She accused me of being paranoid, of trying to control her, but I knew her game now. I had proof of her lies, her manipulations, her scheming. I also had a plan to expose her to the authorities if she kept pushing her luck. I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd fight for what was rightfully mine and make sure she paid for her treachery. The most surprising thing was how much this ordeal changed me. I'd been naive, trusting blindly, thinking love and loyalty were enough. Now I saw that sometimes the people closest to you are capable of the worst betrayals. I learned not to ignore the signs, not to dismiss that little voice telling me something was wrong. I also realized that taking control, being proactive, was the only way to protect myself. I didn't want her to walk away with my house, my inheritance, or the money she stole from us. I wanted justice, and I was willing to fight for it. Looking back, I still feel the sting of betrayal, but I also feel stronger. I've learned that sometimes love isn't enough to hold a relationship together. Trust is essential, and when that's broken, everything else crumbles. I don't know what the future holds now, but I do know I won't let her get away with what she's done. I'll see this through for myself and for the integrity of what we once shared. It's a harsh lesson, but one I needed to learn. And now I'm ready to rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. The court date finally arrived, and I was prepared. All my evidence was laid out: bank statements, emails, texts, witness testimonies. I knew she'd try to spin it, to deny everything and play the victim, but I had the truth on my side. When the judge asked about the transfer of the money, about her plans to divorce, about her attempts to hide assets, I saw her falter. Her confidence cracked just a little when confronted with the facts. I could see the realization in her eyes that she was going to lose everything she'd schemed for. The judge granted the injunction to freeze her assets, and I was awarded temporary custody of the house until the full divorce could be finalized. That moment felt like a small victory, but I knew this was just the beginning of a long battle. Still, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming what was mine and exposing her lies. In the weeks that followed, the process moved swiftly. She was served with the divorce papers, and her attempts to manipulate the situation only made her look worse. I watched her try to spin stories to friends and family, claiming I was controlling or paranoid. But her own brother, Jason, started to distance himself when the truth came out more clearly. The money she transferred, her secret accounts, her lies, people began to see her for what she really was. Eventually, The court ordered her to repay the stolen money, and she was held accountable for her actions. She lost her claim to the house, and her attempt to get my inheritance was blocked. The emotional toll was heavy, but I felt a strange sense of relief. I'd fought hard and I'd won, not just financially but emotionally as well. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like someone who had reclaimed his dignity. Looking back, I realized that this whole ordeal has changed me forever. I learned that trust is fragile and that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. I also learned that in the face of deception, you have to stand your ground, gather your evidence, and fight for what's right. I still feel the sting of her betrayal, but I also feel stronger, more aware of what to watch out for. The biggest lesson I take away is this: never ignore the signs, no matter how small they seem. Love isn't enough if there's no trust, and betrayal can destroy everything you've built in an instant. But it's also possible to rebuild, better, wiser, and more cautious. I've come out of this a different man, one who knows his worth and won't be fooled again. I hope my story serves as a warning to others. Trust your instincts, protect your assets, and never let someone's lies go unchecked. Because in the end, justice isn't just about money or possessions. It's about reclaiming your life and your peace of mind.